Beyond the Ring, a podcast that covers all things in the stock show industry from the informative to the insane, starring Ryan Rash
I am the human version of Tangled Christmas Lights.
and Dale Hummel.
The best way to predict the future is to create it.
Now on with the show.
Welcome to Beyond the Ring. This is Dale Hummel, along with co-star Ryan Rash.
Hello, hello, hello.
Ryan, the question is, how much do we pay our guest?
You're not paying Chase jack shit, and we all know it.
He gets free room and board.
He does not. That is because he is your child.
Oh, that's included in like parenting.
Well, you had him.
They do have to work for their food and board here, by the way.
Yeah.
Some chores, morning, night, whatever we can get out of them. With that said, we do have my son Chase Hummel with us today. Chase will be our resident expert on the topic that we get into. Before that, let's go into current events. I only have one current event, Ryan. It's not political, and it's not even about China.
Oh, go right ahead.
Are you or Chase familiar with Beyond Meat?
No.
I am.
Anybody familiar with Beyond Meat? No. Chase?
Somewhat.
So this is our artificial meat that back in 2019 had a stock price of like $198, which everybody was saying this is going to end the animal industry. Fortunately, as of today, their stock price is floating somewhere between $6 and $8. So it is absolutely crashed. Their investors are furious, and it looks like the meat industry is going to continue. But that was you, Ryan. You would have seen there were fast food restaurants that had the Beyond Meat or Beyond Burger or Impossible Burger, same kind of artificial meat, cultured meat.
Well, why
whatever,
didn't you just
whatever
say
you want to call it.
artificial meat?
Artificial meat. That's what it is. It looks like that is coming to an end, at least temporarily. I can't think about it, Ryan. Trying to grow meat in a petri dish that somebody's going to eat.
Yeah, I'm out.
Well, I know a bit about Beyond Meat. All their meat, it's none of the sort of test tube meat. It's all plant-based alternative. They use like beet pulp extract to give it the red color. I've heard a little bit about their burger.
Basically a veggie burger.
Veggie burger. But the odd thing about them is they've worked real hard to make them nutritionally identical. The one difference is they're significantly higher in salt.
Great. That's good for a lot of people, I bet.
Now, I don't fear the plant burgers. I do not fear them taking over the meat industry. I do fear the test tube meat a bit.
See, I just can't get over that mental block. But the average person out there doesn't understand it anyway, so maybe they're okay.
I'd go ahead and eat it. The way I think about it, sir, people talk about veal being supple and tender. How tender do you think something that's never walked in its life is going to be?
Oh, my God. Poor Chase.
Oh, Chase, I don't know about that. Was there something else you were telling me about cultured meat recently? What was the...
Okay, so the cultured meat company that really is sort of leading the industry as far as I know, or at least is leading in publicity, that's going to be a company in Australia called Vow. Their whole deal is that test tube meat. They take an animal cell, they grow it in a petri dish, they create actual muscle cells from that animal that you could eat. Technically, I don't know if it's even legal in Australia to sell it as meat, but they've already got all the technology set up for it and the production set up for it. And their big publicity stunt in the last year was that they took sheep cells, replaced the myoglobin gene, which is the gene that makes muscle, with mammoth DNA that they'd extracted from frozen carcasses in the Siberian tundra. Now, there were a couple gaps in it because that was severely deteriorated DNA, and they filled in the blanks with African elephant DNA, which would have been probably the closest living thing to a mammoth, not genetically, but how it lived and biologically. So they had this sort of mammoth meatball was what they sold it as. And I say sold, it was just a big marketing stunt. They didn't sell it. Nobody ate it. It was just this giant hunk of...
So nobody even tried it?
Nobody even tried it. Their excuse for it was, who knows if people are allergic to mammoth myoglobin, which I think bull crap. As we know very clearly, people ate mammoth for much of natural history. But I think the more important part was that elephant meat is known for being rather gamey, so I think they didn't want their publicity stunt to be rated as horrible.
Ryan, I can see you're going to jump on this artificial meat thing wholeheartedly.
No.
Maybe you can. I bet you can find some in Vegas. If they have it anywhere, it'll be in Vegas this week.
I don't know if it's even legal to sell yet.
Got it.
I am not partaking in any of that. I probably won't be eating much. I'm going to drink my diet once I get to Vegas. But I have more important things to talk about than fictional meat.
I'm just happy that Beyond Meat has crashed. The veggie burger that was going to take over the fast food world did not happen.
Okay. Well, good for you. But next. So there was a debate. I know that
A
most
debate.
of y'all don't. Yes, there was a debate. There was a very large debate, a very well
Like the primary debate, the Republican debate.
No, that we talked about this on here last
Joe
week,
had a
you
debate.
idiot.
The Democrats debated.
You just don't want me to talk about this. Is the problem?
Go ahead, promote your
So-
boyfriend all you would like.
I'm not promoting jack shit. I am telling the truth here. So DeSantis and Gavin Newsom debated on Hannity. And the only winner in this was Hannity, by the way. Because all of his questions were very good. And also, he had the facts up there that you could see that where he got his questions, where this information came from, all this other stuff. So he did a very good job, and he tried to keep them from yelling over each other. He didn't do a real good job at that, but he tried. So I thought Hannity did good. The other two, God help them. So I have come to the conclusion that Dill's boyfriend, DeSantis, he had everything on his side. He had Hannity on his side. He had all the questions on his side. He had all the facts on his side. And when he talked and the answers he gave, they were fine. I mean, perfectly fine. Some of them were actually good. But when you have all of everything on your side and you never once knock out your opponent, that is a problem. Even though Dale will not admit it. And he never knocked out Newsom the whole hour and a half. And then the other thing for him is when that man is not talking, he is absolutely cringeworthy. I mean, cringeworthy. Like, he stood there with this weird smile staring into the camera. Then he was looking for people in the audience. He molested his water bottle half the time. Like, dude has got issues.
I am not going to argue the fact that he's very, very uncomfortable not answering. I did not oppose any of his questions, or wasn't opposed to any of them. What I was opposed to is Newsom just stood there and bold-faced lied. And the problem that I guess DeSantis has, Newsom's very good at looking into the camera and lying, even though the facts that Hannity has right there in front of him contradict exactly what he's saying, but it didn't slow him down even a little bit. So
Because he's a sociopath.
he's a something.
I mean-
I don't know what he is, but I mean, it's not like he thought he was correct. The facts were presented directly in front of him. He could see them as well.
Dude, he made up his own facts as he went along. Like, he just pulled numbers out of anywhere. And just, again, I abhor everything that Gavin Newsom stands for. I think everything that he said in that debate pretty much was all made up lies. He knew they were all lies. All of that, I have never seen anyone in my history of watching politicians in a debate be that smooth, that confident. He was the attacker, not being attacked. If I didn't despise everything that man stood for, and if he was not clinically a sociopath, he would be probably the most impressive individual in the history of the world. Like, it was insane.
I am not going that far, but I would be nervous if you put him in front of the uneducated public. They are going to believe him. That's where I'm.
Oh, he's gonna be president. Just get ready for it.
It's impossible with somebody that crazy. He just lied. He did not tell the truth once.
No, he did not. And I have never watched the man until the debate. And I thought when people were saying, oh, he'll be president, he'll run for president, I was like, he got recalled in California. There's no way any of this is going to work. I was wrong. I have now watched the man. Everyone should live in fear for the day that he actually runs. Live in fear. I'm serious.
I think that I think over time, if you give the public time, that the information will get out that he's just, when they fact check, they do anything. When they expose just his horrendous lies, his ability to deliver, and he delivers lies better than, like you said, better than anybody I've seen, period. But that you can't live on that. Look at, well, I guess his aunt or whatever, Pelosi, she made a long career of doing about the same.
I'm just telling you, I think everybody should live in fear for when that man actually runs for president, because I think that he lied about everything that came out of his mouth. I literally do not agree with one single policy or anything that he stands for. And I'm telling you, I am scared to death of what that man will do with. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
So if they're able to push Biden out, which they keep saying they're not, I do not believe them. You believe Gavin will be the one that comes in?
I don't know. I think Gavin's. After I watched that, I think he's smart enough to wait. Like, just wait where he can have a full campaign, the whole 9 yards, all of it. I'm
so unlike Michelle, it would be Michelle's favor to have it very. She came in at the last minute where she doesn't have to debate. She doesn't have to do anything, where you believe Gavin would be better off taking the full gamut.
Oh, he needs the whole thing. Yeah.
No, that debate was very. I'm with you. It's concerning how well he delivered the lies he delivered and made them believable. If Hannity would not have had the facts right there, he would have been challenging Hannity even further. I guess he already did. I guess, even though it's just black and white, it wasn't. There wasn't any question, but he sure made it a question.
It was scary. I mean, flat ass scary, but wild. And then I don't. This is just a general comment about the next year's elections. Something is going on. I don't know what, and I am very confused. But right now, like, Manchin's not running for senator again. All these people are not rerunning. And everybody that's not rerunning, they're from both parties. But they are people like Patrick McHenry, who is the interim speaker. Like, he's not running. He's been serving since 2005. Everybody that's not running easily would get elected again. Very, very easily.
Maybe they're just this incredibly hot, divided political environment is wearing on them.
I don't believe that. What are they going to do? Seriously.
I don't know.
You have no career after being a politician.
What other explanation do you have?
I'm telling you, there's something that we don't know. There's something. I mean, maybe they don't. I mean, maybe.
Are you talking that they know about aliens and they don't want to?
No, I'm just saying maybe they don't. Maybe they're afraid Trump is going to win and they don't want to, like, go through all that again. I don't know. Like, but it is hella odd that all these people that could easily get reelected are not running in masses. And again, you have no career after you're a politician. That is it. That is your career. So, just a side note. Very strange.
Very strange. What else do you have for current event?
I don't. That's it.
I don't either. I'm not going to talk about China. I'm not going to talk about. Yeah, we're just going to leave it alone. Let it alone for the week anyway. Well, if we're good on current events, let's go ahead and you can talk to us a little bit about the BTR JLA.
Okay, top 10 overall hog exhibitors in the nation as of right now. First place, Avery Layton of Oregon. Second place, Hunter Stevens of Arizona. Third place, Parker Johnson of Indiana. Fourth place, Dallas Headley of Oregon. Fifth place, Zane Downey of Montana. Sixth place, Holden Salivar of Montana. Seventh place, Roxanne Coates of Arizona. Eighth place, Carson Ostrander of Oregon. Ninth place, Clara Kowalski of Oregon. And 10th place, Kinley Cron of Texas. Oh, we got a Texas person in there. Isn't that wonderful? So that is your
Crockett,
top 10.
Texas, you said?
No, I said Texas, La Mesa, West Texas. But that is your top 10 in the hog standings as of right now. I want to thank Showcoat for being a national corporate sponsor for the past 2 years. Champion approved. Showcoat manufactures the best award-winning livestock grooming products for show cattle, goats, horses, sheep, and swine. No matter what you have in the barn, if you're looking for the winning edge, the advanced shag strategy developed by Showcoat Solutions will change your hair growing routine overnight. So thank you to Showcoat. We're big believers in your product, and we appreciate your sponsorship and support of the Beyond the Ring Junior Livestock Association.
Absolutely. Tried and true product. Appreciated very much. I would like to personally thank ShowFresh H2O for their continued support of this podcast and the junior stock show industry. ShowFresh H2O is not made in China, but rather American made and backed by science. If you'd like to ensure your stocks stay on water while hauling to the shows, you need to give ShowFresh H2O a try. ShowFresh H2O can be found at your local farm store, at your local supply trailer, and at swampfox.com. Thank you very much for your support. The episode title, Anything and Everything Cloning. Ryan tells me this has been on the list for 4 years.
It's been on the list for 2 years.
2 years.
2 years.
Well, we brought our special guest, Chase, the most affordable guest we could find that has some knowledge in this area in to help answer some of these questions or discuss cloning a little bit. But before we get started, Chase, why on earth from your compound there at Lakeland College, what possessed you to learn as much as you possibly can about cloning?
Well, when I was real young, I was always fascinated by natural history, especially prehistoric life. Think dinosaurs, mammoths, all and everything within that field. And being obsessed with that, my dream was always to see one alive and walking around. I watched Jurassic Park on loop practically for days sometimes. And
Hey, I like Jurassic Park too, by the way. I think it's cool.
Which one, though, Ryan? There are multiple now.
All of them. I've watched all of them.
you can watch all of them, but you have to admit that 3 is bad. It's just the worst of them.
3 was not my favorite for sure, but I mean, I still think I liked all of the movies, and I do like the concept like Chase does. But continue on, sir. I just wanted you to know you're not the only Jurassic Park nerd on the podcast today.
I'm very glad to hear that. But growing up, I always loved the idea of not just seeing dinosaurs alive and walking about, but being able to exhibit them in a park, that sort of thing. And, about that is the issue is nobody has succeeded in cloning a dinosaur or even more recently extinct species like a mammoth or a Tasmanian tiger or any of these species that were around within the time that humans have been on Earth, and there are decently well-preserved specimens of. So I started looking into the science of cloning. I talked to my dad about it, who knew about it because he was an animal science professor, and he told me about the gist of it. And from there, I just kind of went down a rabbit hole researching it.
Excellent. We're gonna lean on you just a little bit today, but I guess before we get started, I don't know what direction to go, but I assume most of our listeners are familiar with what was noted as the first successful clone. And Chase, real briefly, give us a little bit of history on cloning, how long we've been doing this, and what has been cloned.
Okay, technically speaking,
Not Dale, thank God.
Thank you.
Technically, the first clone was actually in the 1950s. Some African dwarf frogs, I believe. It was not cloning as we think of it today. Instead, he was taking embryonic cells and almost creating an artificial twin, rather than really going for what we know of today as somatic cell cloning, which somatic cell cloning, the more common procedure that people use in the livestock industry, allows you to take a cell from a mature or even deceased animal, if recent enough, and create a genetic copy of that animal. And the first somatic cell clone of a mammal would have been Dolly the sheep in 1996.
Okay, see, at least I wasn't wrong. I was wrong, but at least I was right on that one because I thought Dolly was the first. I didn't know they did bullfrogs, so good for them. But at least I was right on the first one that we're basically talking about.
And where has it progressed from Dolly, Chase? What species have we cloned?
Oh boy, it's quite the list, all things considered. We've cloned, all the basic livestock species, your cattle, your horses, your sheep, goats, pigs. We've gotten dogs and cats. We've gotten lab mice. But there's a lot of more unusual species on the list as well. They've cloned coyotes, wolves, deer, carp, camels, the black-footed ferret, which is actually critically endangered, which is a net gain for the species. They cloned it from a sample taken back in the 80s. Unfortunately, the clone they made turned out to be sterile for unrelated reasons, so they're trying again with that same sample. They've cloned water buffalo, rabbits.
So why are they cloning some of those things? Research purposes, or what's the reason for cloning a rabbit or a water buffalo?
Well, I imagine some of these were one-offs just to see, can we do it? For some of them, like livestock, it's a very pragmatic purpose that you have an animal that was very successful and you want to create more or another opportunity to use them as a sire or dam in your genetic operation. Some of them, like rabbits and mice and stuff that you'd use in, research labs, the benefit of cloning is that it allows you to create a lot of animals that are genetically the same. This means that when you do tests on them, there is few extraneous variables that could be created from one individual to another and genetic differences. And it really helps when you're trying to create multiple animals that all have the same genetic illness, say a rare disease like cystic fibrosis, when you're trying to test in that.
That makes perfect sense. Well, then I've got a deeper question that may offend some, but it's real. What if we wanted to clone Ryan? Could we do it?
Please, God, don't.
You hypothetically, could you? Yes. Can you legally? The United States says no.
So what if we took the most brilliant people on cloning, put them on some island in some unknown country? Do you think this is happening? Can it happen, or is it happening right now? Human cloning.
As far as I know, there have not been any successful human clones, whether that's not because they just didn't advertise the fact, because it's well within our reach to achieve in this modern day. There have been genetically modified humans. There was one researcher in China, I forget the name of, but a couple years back, he genetically engineered, I believe, 3 children to be HIV resistant. And those kids were born, and the Chinese, they threw the book at him the moment his research came out of what he'd done. They threw him in jail for 2 years and gave him about $500,000 fine.
I would think that if it's going to be done somewhere, it would be in China. It'd be the super military person that they'd like to replicate. But I don't. I'm going to stay away from the China thing. Chase, before we get into some of the things that are more specifically stock show related, in common terminology, I want to stress that in simplified version, explain the cloning process to our listeners, how it works, please.
All right. To break it down for anybody who's never been informed about the cloning process before, the easiest way to explain it is just chronologically by the steps it happens. First off, you have an animal, preferably alive, but you can take it from a dead animal up to 5 days afterwards if the temperature has been right. You take that sample, usually from the ear or subcutaneous tissue, and then you preserve it. From that, you can grow a cell line that can be used later. Now you need to find a donor animal from which you can flush out an egg cell or an oocyte, and then you use a specialized tool to remove the nucleus, which contains all the genetic matter and DNA, out of this egg. So it's sort of a blank slate. Then, from that cell line you created earlier, you extract a nucleus and you implant it inside this unnucleated egg. So rather than being a combination of 2 specific individuals' DNA to create an embryo, it's just one DNA or one set of DNA in this embryo that creates a genetic copy after they use electricity or chemicals to fuse them and stimulate cellular division. From there, it develops into an embryo, which can then be transplanted into a recipient, and then hopefully, after gestation, it'll hit the ground.
Ryan, that seems pretty simple, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, the most simple. We can do that
we can
over drinks.
Now, I had a good friend, Ryan. We talked about this one in the Savannah Cat episode. Dr. Ray Favero, the reproductive specialist that I met in grad school at the University of Illinois, he claims for a very minimal amount of money, there's cloning technology out there that we could utilize if I were to build a small lab here. He could do this cloning, he and Chase, and I could look in through the window possibly, but it doesn't, I know as Chase explains it, he simplified things, but the actual process, I do not believe, after visiting with Dr. Favero, I think it's going to become more and more common. I think our biggest hurdle is, Chase, and you would know better than I, there's a lot of embryos implanted to get a successful live birth, I assume.
Yes, that's embryo technology, embryo transfer technology already sees some difficulties. And with how much you have to work on this embryo and the possible stress induced on recips and just all these other factors really mean that you are going to have to create a lot of embryos and implant a lot of recips to get a successful live birth. So let's assume you create 100 embryos, you implant them, assume only half of them take in the recips, and assume only a quarter of them make it to birth. And from there, you got to keep that quarter alive. Very famously, there was Celia, the Pyrenean ibex. The ibex went extinct in the wild, but luckily they'd taken a cell sample from it because they knew cloning technology had just been invented. And from that, I believe they created something like 150 embryos, and planted them. Something like only 70 to 50 took. And of that, only 3 made it into late gestation, and only 1 of them was born. And of that one that was born, for some reason, it was born with a lung defect that meant that it died 7 minutes after it was born. So for 7 minutes, this animal that had been dead for years was back and then gone again.
Interesting. Well, Ryan, I know what you wanted to talk about on this. We do talk about cloning in the livestock show industry, and we have clones out there. We have several clones right here at Hummel Livestock in terms of some of the bucks that we decide to clone and keep around just a little bit longer. And I'm happy to discuss those as we move into it. But Ryan, do you your opinions on the cloned animals that are out there in terms of breeding animals?
My thing on cloning is I'm not against it. I'm fine with it. I don't want anybody to think that I have some moral or whatever thing against cloning, and that is not it at all. Like, if I am open to cloning things, etc., all this other stuff. My deal is this has been going on in the livestock industry for a bit. It's not like it's brand new or anything like that. And while my personal opinion is I see more advantages in using cloning to try to recreate or replicate a great animal that maybe won a lot or all this other stuff, because in my experience of seeing clones and all this other stuff, they do look pretty similar. I'm not going to say they're identical, but they do look very similar. And so I can see advantages in that, but nobody does that really. I mean, it's maybe starting just a little, but you do not hear of people cloning animals to go try to win, a banner. You hear people cloning animals because of just what Chase and you were talking about, the breeding aspect of it. Y'all have bucks, all this other stuff. Well, here's the thing. Again, this isn't a new concept.
Please enlighten us on this thing.
Okay. This isn't a new concept. And I have yet to hear of Heat Wave 156 siring the grand champion steer at some show. And I haven't heard of it in any species. So clearly, it's not as successful as what you would think it would be in terms of using the clone of an animal to breed other animals.
I think there's a very logical explanation to that, and that's that I think by the time an animal's reached the end of its life as a sire, I think that newer, better animals have been created. So by the time that you get a clone back, there's a decent chance that those genetics are just not what the show ring is looking for anymore. It's not that these animals are disadvantaged by being sired by a clone. It's just that the show ring can move so fast in what they're looking for that you just can't keep up with it.
And I
think you're absolutely probably correct, Chase. But again, if that is one of the factors, why the hell are these people spending all this much money to do it?
I think there's another explanation. Ryan, think about cattle, goats, sheep. Cattle or goats? We'll stay on those two species just for our
Well, there's
situation.
cloning in all species.
Yes, but we're going to use an example on cattle and goats. So think about you've, and I know you don't ask the parents when you go look at cattle or anything like that.
No.
But envision a flush set of calves or a flush set of goat kids within that flush set that have the same sire and the same dam, obviously.
Yep.
There's a lot of variation. So
absolutely there is.
So I think a lot of
this is another reason I don't know why the hell people do this and spend all this money.
So with that said, I think even if we have a clone that we can DNA test that clone and it will be an exact match to the original animal. We know that, we understand it. Yeah. We're going to get into another part there. And if you think of the equation, genetics plus environment equals phenotype. Most people think of environment basically from birth on, but guess what?
It's before birth.
Yeah. Chase, when's environment kick in?
Pretty much the moment that embryo starts development.
Yeah. Before conception, before anything. So all of those things, and we're going to talk a little bit about fetal programming and epigenetics. And I think that will make some sense. But Ryan, I always like to argue with you or disagree, but you are correct. There's been limited success out of the clones relative to the original, partially Chase's theory comes into play. I can use our bucks that we've cloned here as an example. We cloned them. Actually, the bucks that we cloned, we did to use them, to continue to use them to actually make females. I'm not saying that we wouldn't sell a show with her, and we sold plenty of them that went on and did well. I don't know that one of them won a major show. I honestly didn't keep track of that. But our purpose of cloning was we wanted to continue to have that female base, and we didn't have semen on hand, or for whatever reason, that was the only direction we can go. And I would say those clones, like you said, Ryan, they represented the original visually or phenotypically pretty close, not exact, but pretty close.
Yeah.
But you are right. I don't know that, just out of odd chance, if that clone had produced something absolutely great, statistically, that original animal produced a great one. Statistically, that animal may not even produce another one, and the same statistics apply to the clone, that they probably will not. However, I think it goes beyond that. And I think that's where we talk about fetal programming or epigenetics or environment prior to birth coming into play just a little bit. We can somewhat replicate how that steer was fed and things to a certain degree. We can at least get close. We can't be exact by any means, but we can get close. And this goes to my theory, and you'll hear a lot of people call these old wives' tales. There are people in the goat world and the cattle world and probably in the sheep world that there are certain recips that they will tell you, irregardless of what embryo they put in those recips, generate great ones. That's a pretty hard stretch for me to believe from a science standpoint. Chase, where are you at on that?
While I don't know if there's any solid proof that any one recip might produce great ones, there is quite a body of evidence that shows that a bad recip can produce poor ones. As, if you like, I've got a couple examples.
Please do.
Not necessarily talking about recipients, just that the conditions in the womb and during gestation can have a massive effect on the animal and even on that animal's offspring. For instance, just for the effect on the animal, everybody knows that you shouldn't drink while you're pregnant, or else it could cause fetal alcohol spectrum disorder.
You need to listen.
Okay. What?
You need to listen to this drinking while pregnant thing.
I'm not pregnant, and I'm just going to say something right here, right now. I understand that this is all. I am not saying any of the information that Chase is about to say is unfactual. I don't think you should probably drink while you're pregnant. All this other stuff. I know there was God knows how many damn people born while their mothers drank and smoked all through the entire pregnancy, decades and decades ago, and very few of those people had major issues when they came out.
Chase, that's all you.
Well, I'll counter that the IQ score has significantly increased over the years. Now, whether that's
Jesus Christ, the IQ, it's bigger, it's better now. Oh fuck,
I would argue that, looking at this generation, the younger generation.
I'm saying IQ. IQ does not talk about what they believe or what they were taught. It just talks about their basal reasoning skills. That if they're presented with X, Y, and Z riddles or puzzles or questions, that they can answer them correctly. That doesn't mean they're wise or that they've been taught correctly. It just shows that they have the mental capacity to do better.
Well, Ryan, I'm going to go into, and we're already into the fetal programming. There's fetal programming, just to explain it very in as simple a form as I can. Environmental cues experienced during fetal development, and they will determine the trajectory of that animal in terms of its lifespan and different things. And the things that the three things that I have I guess assume, and maybe I need to pull the information up, that impact fetal programming are nutrition, hormonal, and physiological stress. And those things during pregnancy on those animals are going to impact that fetus. And there's lots of research from humans to animals to every direction you can imagine. And what I would like to get across to our listeners, and sometimes we jump past the big picture a little bit, but there is no question when we're working with embryo transfer, or we're working with anything, even artificial insemination or natural matings, that animal, that I guess in a situation where we're using recips, that recip is going to have an impact on that offspring. I can't tell you good, bad. I can't quantify it in terms of going one direction or another, but I can quantify it that it does have an impact. And that's interesting. And going back to those breeders that swear there's a given recip in the cattle world or the goat world that continues to produce great ones, I don't doubt maybe they can foster a very positive unit environment. I think it's probably a little bit coincidental, but Craig, our manager, will tell you the same thing. He's got a couple recips here that he swears hit every single time, irregardless of what we're putting in them. However, he's aware of what those recips are, and each time he sets those recips up, he darn sure puts what he considers to be that best mating in there. So it kind of almost snowball effect builds upon itself. But Chase, before we get too far into there, and there's no question that fetal programming / epigenetics, and Chase can differentiate between those two better than I can. There's one thing that I want to bring in, just an example, and there's lots of research data out there. For the most part, changes in the maternal environment can be due to nutritional alteration, hormones, or exposure to toxins. Toxins being alcohol, smoking in humans, things like that. So what we need to understand is that developing fetus forms an impression of the world into which it will be born via its mother's nutritional status. Its development is thus modulated to create the best chance of survival, if that makes sense. Back when we had a severe drought here a few years ago, it seems like we have a drought all the time. Those calves that were born to cows that went through extreme drought conditions and had very, very minimal feed survive drought conditions better themselves. Does that make any sense, Chase?
There's actually a human example of that. The fact of it is that, interestingly, mothers who were pregnant through famine conditions, the kids they give birth to are obviously going to be smaller. That's like a no-duh situation. Less nutrients, less building material creates a smaller fetus, if it even finishes to term. What's interesting is that the subsequent children of those children who were in the womb during that famine condition are also smaller than the average of what they should be. Interestingly, North Korea, for example, the average North Korean is over 5 inches shorter than the average South Korean, despite the fact that for the majority of their history, they were one unified population. It's decades of famine that have caused this.
So you think the research attributes that, or that's just a theory?
I believe there's research for it. I can't quote any in particular, so I'll just give you this anecdotal evidence for now.
Understandable. Well, I think that's good. I'm going to go back, Ryan, and you'll love this part. When Ryan when he goes and looks at a calf, he doesn't ask about the sire, the dam, or any of those things in the background, because there are a lot of things that affect this. Think about all the time and effort and thought that goes into making breeding decisions. When we have a percentage, and I don't know what percentage I would throw on that, but I'm going to say 30, 40% that's left to the uterine environment, to the environment when that actual oocytes being developed, or that gamete or that sperm cells being developed. There's so many things that come into play that are out of our control that will determine the genetic makeup or how that DNA is actually read. So I guess what I'm saying is we can pretend to be these great livestock breeders and all those things, but it's interesting that there's so much more of it left to things that are not in our control, that we don't have a firm enough grasp upon to take advantage of yet, that come into play and really make a huge difference. I can cite examples. When you look at certain cattle operations, or not goats because we haven't been here long enough, let's use cattle in this example. When a breeder in a given environment is in that same environment day in and day out, same management practice, nutritionally, vaccinations, all those things. Let's say we give these animals almost an identical environment year after year for many, many generations. You can make put selection pressure on animals that will thrive in that exact environment. And it's amazing how they explode when they're in that exact environment. Take them somewhere else, they may not generate as well because we're feeding them different. They're in a different environment. Maybe stressors are different. We come back to those three simple things, whether it's nutrition, a toxin, or hormones. that come into play to make some of this variation. So it's interesting to me. Real quick, Chase, tell us a little bit about epigenetics and fetal programming, and maybe give us an example. I think you talked to me once about the chicken trial.
Well, epigenetics is the idea that specific environmental triggers, now this could be in the womb, or this could be once the animal has been born or has even started maturing, certain environmental stressors can cause an actual change in the expression of the phenotype. Sometimes it's on a generational level, like I mentioned with the children or the grandchildren of famine survivors. Or in other cases, a very common example is bees. All bees are born the same. Genetically, every larva is identical. But the difference that makes a queen bee from a worker bee is that when they want to make a queen bee, they make an extra large sort of nursery cell, and then instead of feeding it just plain old honey, what they feed it is a sort of cocktail called royal jelly. It's a cocktail of amino acids, fatty acids, proteins, hormones, carbohydrates. It's this mixture
So that nutritional trigger is going to impact it.
Yes, and that causes it, instead of maturing into a worker bee like every single one of its siblings almost, it matures into a queen bee, who then will have developed ovaries and be significantly larger than most workers.
So there's example that even though here's the exact same genetic base, that environment, nutrition, whatever you want to refer to it, can change the dynamic of that animal.
Yes.
I like that. Tell me about how close a chicken is to a dinosaur.
Ryan, you laugh, but the fun thing about it, now this is getting caught in semantics. A chicken is technically a dinosaur. It's part of the dinosaur family, and it is honestly more closely related to a tyrannosaur than a brachiosaurus is to a tyrannosaur. They are the last surviving member of that lineage. Do they look like a dinosaur that we think of? No. They lack tails, they lack teeth. Most of them can fly. But, so to speak, they evolved from dinosaurs, plain and simple.
Hey, I know a bunch of people that are scared as you know what of chickens, so it makes sense. They're dinosaurs. I'm fine with it. Chase, the one thing that I have to ask you a question, but we got to get you out more, dude. You spend way too much time behind a computer or something. We're gonna have to get you out more in the world. But
I am fine, Ryan. I'm at college. I'm doing college stuff. It's fine.
Oh, I don't know about all that. I'm gonna have to come see you in person, and maybe you're just not doing it the way you need to. I don't know. We're gonna work on it, buddy. But the one thing that I want Chase to kind of give, or Dale or Chase, either one of y'all, like, can y'all? Because I think people are interested in this. Like, can anybody put like a price tag on what it costs to clone these things? Because
what are you talking about when you say these things?
Let's just use livestock animals in general.
All right. I've tracked down a couple prices on some of the species. Let's see. According to UC Davis, they say that a cloned cow, the production cost, that's about $15,000. Now, I don't know what Transova might charge for it, because they don't have to charge just the production cost. They could charge whatever they felt like to make a profit. Right. For a goat, it's supposed to be $20,000, says the University of Michigan. But Viagen, which I don't remember perfectly, but they claim to be, or I thought I saw something claiming that they were sort of subsidiary or sister company to Transova, Viagen. They price horses at $85,000, dogs at $50,000, and cats at $35,000. I doubt they actually cost that much when you look at the prices of goats or cattle. It's just that's what they're charging because they know people will pay it.
Right. I just wanted people to have a general idea, because again, it's not cheap at all to do this, and I just wanted them to have a general idea on it. So,
and I think I can speak from Transova and where they are, and I don't know where they are right now today, but in the beginning, you would have to send your cell line in. They would charge you X amount to develop that cell line and preserve that cell line. And then some cell lines are more effective at going further and becoming eventual embryos that they can implant, and others just don't work very well. But in the beginning, you'd have to basically pay their lab fees for that day or 2 or 3 or whatever they're going to be working on, and you may not come up with anything. Now, it's evolved considerably since then, and I'm sure there's a situation where they can give you a pretty ballpark figure. I'm going to say somewhere between 10 and 20,000 on a goat. Is my best guess at current date, and I'm sure we could call Transova and get an idea, but there's a lot of variables that come into play there. And of the few clones that we have here, there were a lot of embryos that were put in. There were a lot of pregnancies that did not amount to live births. So I don't know, looking in from the outside, I'm sure Transova is going to continue to do cloning, and I'm sure they'll become more and more efficient at it. But looking in from the outside, I don't think it's making them a lot of money, considering all the efforts that go into it and how many embryos have to go into recips. And just think about purchasing and housing that many recips to try to accommodate this. So it's interesting to me. And Ryan, I wanted to circle all the way back. You said something about you would prefer to clone animals to make that show animal, recreate that market animal, or maybe that show female. There's no question that has been done. I don't think near at the level that we see cloning for bulls or bucks or things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Like, I know people have done it, but just to me, I would think that you'd have a more desired outcome that way than the other. But again,
what's interesting to me is normally you'll see bulls that are cloned or bucks that are cloned, the male side of it. I'm sure they're cloning females, but it's at a much lower percentage. And when I stop and think about it, some of those elite donor females, you can't hardly replace some of those. So I'm not opposed to going the other direction in cloning some of the females and seeing where it's at. And again, common knowledge tells us in the stock show industry, when you look at the price of Heatwave or a popular bull, the original bull's price is significantly more on the semen than it is on the clones. And Chase, you can maybe lend us a little more direction about. I can remember teaching my first couple of years in collegiate animal science 101. We would use old wives' tales that if you dehorn a bull, that his calves will be pulled, and just crazy things like that. But there was one situation that old producers used to talk about, that cattle out of a young bull or his calves are going to be different or better than when he matures to say 6, 7, 8 years of age, that something was actually changing in terms of how he was passing his genetics on. Chase, is there anything to that?
Well, there have been studies in humans. Now, I don't know if this applies to livestock, but I can't see any reason it wouldn't, as we're all mammals. But it's believed that the viability of semen decreases as the sperm donor ages, that an old sperm donor's semen, it might get the job done, but it's not quite as high quality. Now, I don't quite know the link between the quality of the semen and the final product of the animal, because you only need one good sperm cell for it to happen. I don't know if necessarily that's...
So what's been hard for me to wrap my head around is how can that, if there's any truth to this, and there's a lot of people that will go on record and say this is real, that depending on when that semen was collected from that bull, we're getting some different results. And again, very hard to quantify, just going off of what people observe on small numbers, and statistically probably not significant. But there is a large number of people that will tell you they prefer to breed to a younger animal than an older animal, as if somehow that DNA, certain genes are maybe been turned on or off, or they're not being read, or in the replication process exactly the same from the time they were young until they're older in terms of the sperm cells that they're generating.
Well, I wouldn't chalk this up to anything like epigenetics. It's just that as any organism ages, well, most organisms, if there's one notable exception, but as organisms age, the telomeres, the bands that contain the DNA, all that sort of thing, they wear down. Splitting over and over and over again means that those cells degrade, and the DNA, every time it's copied, it's more likely to have a little damage than the last time. And once an animal gets so old, that DNA is to a pretty bad point. Now, telomerase is this sort of enzyme that protects the DNA from damage. And different animals have it in different quantities. Humans have a pretty good telomerase. We live a pretty long time. A fruit fly does not. It lives a very brief period of time. Its telomerase is poor at best. Same thing with things like mice or mayflies. It's just that they're not mayflies specifically. They have different reasons for dying, but animals that aren't expected to live long in nature doesn't evolve methods for them to live a while. That's why birds who can fly and have a very low rate of being killed by predators live so long compared to everything else. It's why a parrot might make 80 years, or an elephant can make so long.
Well, that's logical, and that would make sense on maybe some of these older bulls, if semen's being collected towards the end of their life, that the replication process is questionable.
Yes.
I'm just super glad that Holly was not afraid to mate with an older bull, because if she would have, then we wouldn't have Chaser, little Katie.
I love it. I love it. Well, I think there's a lot to this, guys. I can't tell you how much weight I feel comes into play through whether you want to call it fetal programming or epigenetics, that we just don't have control over. I'm not saying we don't have control over, because we do, depending on how we feed them, the environment they're exposed to, the stressors they're exposed to, the lack thereof toxins or the toxins they're exposed to. Those three things, toxins, hormones, and nutrition, are playing a huge role. I believe I can go all the way back, and I can't cite any research, during the gamete production itself. And then from the time of conception and that uterine environment, we're playing a big role. And it makes sense that Mother Nature is going to do their best to adapt to whatever that situation is, adapt that unborn or that fetus or that embryo or that gamete. Let's go all the way down to the gamete level, to adapt that gamete to survive in the environment that they're in. And the only way Mother Nature can read that environment is through cortisol levels via stress, different toxins that may be out in that environment, and the nutritional levels. If nutrition's good, why not create animals that are going to grow and get big and things like that? If they're very limited, and maybe Chase, you can come in on it. If there's a situation that we're on an island and there's a set of animals over hundreds of years, if there's limited feed resources, I assume those animals will become smaller and smaller.
Yes.
Similar to the North Koreans.
There's multiple examples of insular dwarfism, and there's a lot of sort of ideas as to why it happens. There's the obvious example of less food gets smaller, but there's other notes of smaller animals are able to access harder to reach resources. For example, on the Channel Islands off the coast of California, we found specimens of mammoths that were about as tall as the shoulder as I am, which isn't very tall for a mammoth species derived from the Columbian mammoth, which I believe could stand well over 12 to 15 feet tall at the shoulder. And the reason why is that these animals, they had less resources, but being smaller also allowed them to scale the rocky, outcrops across this island to reach harder to get forage in sort of odd places. Now, it could be epigenetics that helps push that forward at an accelerated rate, or it could simply be natural selection pushing away from larger animals and favoring the smaller ones that take up less resources.
Probably a combination of both,
I would imagine.
So, Ryan, now that you have more knowledge on cloning, epigenetics, fetal programming, all those things, think back to the stock show arena. Do you believe cloning will continue to be used more, less, unchanged?
My opinion, and it's just an opinion. And again, I knew some about cloning. I mean, obviously, I don't know as much as Chase. I'm not sure I want to. Glad we have Chase here, but I really do believe that. I mean, that the success in using cloning in a stock show ring will come from replicating animals that have won. I think that will be more successful. And again, you know, Chase talks about the fact that trends change and all this other stuff, and I agree with that to a great deal. But every day, more technology becomes more advanced, so the turnaround will come quicker on all of these things. And I think the true success will be where you, in 2050, you take the grand champion hog from Kansas City, and maybe you can have a clone of that one in the ring by the next year. That's where I see it going, or that's where I see it being the most impactful or the most successful.
And I think we can do that now, just not on a high success rate or high number. But you're right. Just think if we were to send a cell or a tissue sample into a cloning company, let's say Transova, today, and let's say, or right after Louisville, and that animal is off the champion market animal or champion breeding, whatever it may be, depending on the gestation length, whether it's a hog or a goat, sheep, cattle, whatever it is. But let's say a hog, we're looking at under 4 months gestation rate. If you got that sample in right away, I mean, you could do it in a 1 year turnaround today if everything went well. But we're not that advanced. We're not that efficient. But there's no reason at some point we won't be, that all of a sudden you could have the champion barrel from Louisville shown, or you could have 30 clones out of him being shown there the following year. That changes things a bit, doesn't it?
And that's where I see it going, or that's where I see.
So they either become more efficient and they can do that, or they just kind of set where they're at right now, do a few here or there. One thing we didn't talk about is, and I don't even know, and I don't know if Chase would know this. At one point, it was a very gray area whether we would be allowed to consume cloned animals, and even was questionable whether you could consume, whether the USDA, the FDA, the federal government basically at one point was going to try to ban the consumption of meat out of cloned animals, not just the clone itself, but say you have a bull sires calves, it wasn't allowed to go in the food chain, or that was a very gray area for a short period of time. Obviously it can now. I don't honestly know on the cloned animals. I think it's probably okay, but I don't know that the general population out there would be completely good with something like that. Ryan, would you eat a cloned animal?
Wouldn't bother me.
Chase?
I would eat a cloned animal. At the end of the day, meat is meat is meat. It's going to be fine. And I believe in
it's
recent
not
years,
impossible meat.
Okay. Define meat however you will. Meat harvested from a live animal, or once live animal, I should say. I would eat it. And I believe the FDA's stance on it, at least today, is that yes, cloned meat is fine, but that they said expressly, cloned meat is fine to eat, and you're probably never going to find it on a shelf with how expensive it is to produce a cloned animal. You're much more likely to eat the descendants of a cloned animal. And even then, that's rare just because of the cost and the likelihood of commercial producers actually utilizing cloning. So their stance on it is, it's fine.
Simple enough. Well, Ryan, do you have anything else you would like to bring up from a practical standpoint in the stock show world in cloning, or would you like to move on to question and answer, your very favorite?
No, I'm good with going to question and answer, but I just thought this was a topic that a lot of people have asked for. We've had it on here, and I am very thankful that we had Chase, because he knows more about cloning than almost anybody I know. So, Chase,
at least he pretends well.
He is not Gavin Newsom. Stop. Chase, when you crack the code and you do clone the dinosaur, I will be the first investor in your park. Okay? You call me. You let me know.
I'm very glad to hear that. Dinosaurs are off the bench until we can find a frozen carcass, but I will call you about a Pyrenean ibex. Nobody's tried to clone one since that old failed experiment in 2003, but they still have the cell lines. They're viable cell lines. There's just no funding to make it happen.
Perfect. You hit me up.
And there is a project trying to recreate a mammoth, correct?
Yes, but that is not through cloning. Their plan is that you don't have to clone or take nucleus from a mammoth cell because there's no good mammoth cells left to create a cell line from. They're all well past the expiration date for a somatic cell cloning process. The idea is that they're still good enough that you can find fragments of DNA, and that if you can read enough of these fragments and put enough pieces together, that you can create a map of what a mammoth gene or genome would have looked like. And from there, it's a relatively simple process because the majority of DNA in most animals is pretty similar, especially between very closely related ones. So for them, they just have to take an elephant genome and make a few tweaks here and there that are the few things that make a mammoth different from an elephant. Would it be a perfect mammoth? Probably not. I doubt if we'll ever have a perfect full mammoth genome, because we don't have perfect full mammoth DNA sequences. We're just putting together fragments and doing the best we can. But ideally, this would create a pretty much mammoth.
Close enough. People would buy into it.
Close enough. A very hairy.
Ryan, that sounds simple. Ryan, I think you ought to invest now.
Yes, Colossal Biosciences. They've actually made, I think, over $100 million in funding. Everybody from the CIA to influencers have dumped money into their company.
Excellent. Ryan, before we go to question and answer, do you have a sponsor for us?
Yes, Basic Animal Health is proud to present the question and answer portion of the Beyond the Ring podcast each and every week. We'd like to thank the Leonard family and Basic Animal Health and also Leonard Truck and Trailers for their vast support over the BTR JLA over the past 2 years. Basic Animal Health has 3 current products. They are dedicated to providing natural solutions for your animal needs through their products of Gut Health, Show Focus, and Trailer Ride. If you go to www.basicanimalhealth.com and purchase these products and use the code BTRJLA at checkout, we will receive a portion of the profits for awards for the BTRJLA. So thank you, Basic Animal Health and the Leonard family.
Thank you very much. Chase, you're welcome to help out with these questions, but I promise you the first one is 100% Ryan. Completely Ryan.
Uh-huh.
This one comes from David, longtime listener, first-time caller. Is there ways to manage hair on a hairy steer that will be shown slicked off for a terminal show? Would clipping certain parts of the steer benefit during warmer weather?
Oh, okay. So he's asking what's the best way to manage hair on a slick-sheared steer?
I believe yes.
Okay. You can slick them multiple times throughout the year if you want. I personally believe that if you down clip them or shear them up closer to the time, you're going to get smoother and then there's going to be less lines. But that's not throughout the year. You've got to do it within the month or within weeks prior to the show. I do not know any advantage of throughout the year of down clipping them or slicking them off, helping in any other way other than keeping them cool in the summer. But I do think that there's definitely something to when you're slicking stairs, doing it multiple times up to the dang so there aren't any lines and it's smoother.
I think that makes perfect sense. And good question, David. I did not actually think through the question a whole lot until Ryan had it there, but I think that's where we're at. The second question, Ryan, this one's going to make it easy for you. Comes from Adam. When will we see Dale bring some Angus to the North American?
Dale doesn't believe in showing anything cattle. So
we've shown cattle every year for many years, just not very many cattle.
Only at the Toxic Illinois State Fair. That's the only place.
Why would you call it toxic? That is discrimination.
Mm-hmm. I don't care.
We actually, Adam, a lot of the embryos that we bring up from Argentina via Canada and eventually get into the United States, those to me would be what I call foundation genetics, cattle that I've selected to be just really good in their joints, good footed, big back, big bodied, a little stouter maybe than where we're at in the show ring here. Maybe not quite as freak fronted, but still good fronted. And if that's there, I would take a freak fronted one every day as long as everything else comes along with that. I don't know how well accepted what I call those first generation cattle that come direct through the embryos from Argentina are going to be. We have one this year that we're probably going to take out. I don't know where she's going to land. It's going to be a little jumbled up, I'm sure, from one judge to another. But in my mind, she's the epitome of function in terms of her feet and legs, her body, her mass. I still think good enough fronted and ultra sound. So we're going to do that. We have what I call a second generation. We actually purchased a heifer from Oakley Farms in Tennessee that we're going to be showing here actually this weekend at a little jackpot warm-up show in Illinois that was sired by the bull Argentine, Augie, as Ryan and Paul call it. His his favorite bull of all time. And I think that's probably a more logical place to find the show calves is out of one of the bulls or out of one of those cows. We're probably a generation away in terms of where we want to be in the show ring and to see how that kind of goes. So hopefully in the very near future. John has the next question for us. I hear you guys argue. We've never argued, Ryan, ever. We've disagreed. We don't argue, though, about the difference between the show ring and the real world. What species do you think is the closest to both, and which is the furthest away?
Absolutely none. Zero. Nada. None.
Chase, you got to help me here.
Nothing.
Chase,
don't bring Chase in. Do not bring Chase in this. The show animals he likes is not good. I'm not going to call out the breed that he wanted to show at Louisville this year because I'm not going to get the frame sheet people.
I didn't say I wanted to show them. I just said I admired how far they've come.
Chase gets to make us a lot of money cloning whatever animal that is. He does not get to talk about bad. Anyway, no. None. The answer is none. None of them are similar. None.
I don't know. Maybe I don't know anything. Maybe some weirdos like the chicken people are similar or something.
Oh, the chicken people.
They might be because there's only the one base genetic line. Maybe that's possible. Chickens, turkeys. I don't know. I will confess the furthest away. I'm going to say
goats.
Yeah, I'm going to say goats.
Goats.
And I'm going to even take some of that responsibility for being that far away from the real world. I can accept.
I like it.
I can accept that. That's fine. I'll take it. I absolutely, I will be the first one to tell you that the show goats that we are raising to win at the national level and other breeders are raising are so far removed from the real world. There is no longer a resemblance. None. But if we were to show a goat that would survive in the real world, the other species people, there would be no goats shown because they do not look like they need to get the attention of show families, and it just doesn't work. So this is the only option we have. If we want people to show goats, we have to make them look a little more like other show livestock. That's what we've done. We've thrown practicality right out the window. It's gone, ever gone. Ryan, you have to commit. Of the four major species, which one's the closest to the real world?
I am being as honest as I possibly. I do not think any of them are anywhere remotely close.
I think now goats, I think they win both prizes. I think the meat goats are probably the most divorced from what commercial functionality is. I think of all the species that are out there, and I think dairy goats might win for being the closest to what the industry is looking for because they put a lot of emphasis on conformation and functionality in that ring.
Well, that's what we're supposed to be doing as well.
It's what we're supposed to be doing. It's not what we're doing, sir.
This is why.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Well, guys, I appreciate your time. Excellent. Hopefully an educational one. I don't know if anybody's going to want to know anything about cloning or the stock show world. Hopefully we'll have some listeners download this one and enjoy this episode. Until next week, be safe.
Y'all come back now, you hear?